I was conflicted as to whether or not I should even review these phones because these phones are incomplete. Out of the gate, the iPhone 16 devices are missing what many would argue to be the most important feature, Apple Intelligence. It's even the thing that Apple says these phones were built for.
A new generation of iPhone, built from the ground up to deliver Apple Intelligence and its breakthrough capabilities.
You can't properly test out the full Apple Intelligence experience, so it feels strange to review it, but these phones are going to be available in stores in a couple days. I thought I would do a review based on what you do get. Just keep in mind that a lot of the features of what these phones are supposed to do come in the future. Okay, when you unbox the phones this year, the classic Apple stickers are no longer around. It's just paper pamphlets, and then the charging cables are coiled up into ovals instead of the circles from before. They're the same length of cable, they're just wound up differently. Now the colors on the regular non-Pro models are very vibrant this year. They just pop. And if you think about last year when they first came up with that way to deposit colors into glass and just do that subtle pastel stuff, they just took it to 11 and you get these very colorful phones this year. Now I was a little bit disappointed that I got the ultramarine blue instead of the teal for the review unit. Like, not that it matters, I have to send these things back anyways, but I just wanted the teal. I was hoping I would get it. They didn't send it to me. The Pro devices, no colorful options this year. The closest to a color is this thing, the Desert Titanium. It's a nice color, I get it. This is a very in color too right now in terms of like fashionable colors, but I don't know. It's just strange to me that the Pro devices didn't get any kind of vibrant colors this year. They usually do. So these are the 4 new phones this year. We have the iPhone 16, the 16 Plus, the 16 Pro, and then the 16 Pro Max. And all 4 of them have the action button this year. Only the Pro models had them last year, but now they're on the top left, and all of them have it. So the regular iPhone 16s no longer have the hardware toggle, which is, I think a lot of people are gonna miss. And then on the right side of each phone, or like the right edge of each phone, there is now the new button, which is called camera control. They don't like calling it a button, but it is a button because you can press down on it and it depresses like a button. But we'll come back to the camera control in a minute. The screens on the iPhone 16 and 16 Plus haven't changed from the previous generation. So these still have a 6.1 and 6.7 inch display respectively. They're very nice screens in terms of image quality for regular media, but they're still 60 hertz panels. And when you use them, just swiping around, if you're used to higher refresh panels, these feel strangely sluggish for a 2024 device, especially one that costs $800 and $900 respectively. I really hope that this is the last year that Apple does this. At least that's the rumor. Now the screens on the Pro devices are bigger. These are now 6.3 and 6.9 inches. Now, if I'm being honest, I really think most people would have a tough time telling these new screens apart from the previous generation, from the iPhone 15 Pro devices. The only real way to tell is by looking at the bezel. So this is a 15 Pro Max, and the older device has a noticeably thicker bezel, but again, you just really have to be looking for it. Now, one thing I did notice about the 16 Pro Max, and also the 16 Pro, but it's more prominent on the Pro Max. I remember last year talking about how in certain games, the inner parts of my palm would touch the screen, like the edges of the screen, and would cause some accidental inputs. It is even more pronounced on the 16 Pro Max. I think the bezel is just like so thin that it's very easy for an accidental input on stuff like this. So I think a case fixes it, but if you are someone that goes caseless for whatever reason, you're just clicking things by accident sometimes. That's just the nature of very thin bezels. And keep in mind, this is only for games when you're like actually gripping it tight like this, watching shows and stuff, not an issue. The ceramic shield glass on the new iPhones is supposed to be 50% stronger than the previous generation, but if you do want a screen protector, the new ones from Dbrand are really good and they were super easy to put on. The regular iPhone 16s are pretty much the same size as the previous generation, but the Pro devices are bigger because they have slightly bigger screens, but it's so slight. Like, this is the 15 Pro Max versus the 16 Pro Max. You can barely tell the difference, both visually and in your hand. Okay, let's talk about performance. So, as you would expect, new phones, new chips, better performance. The Pro models have a new thermal substructure, which is supposed to help with heat for sustained performance. I didn't really notice a big improvement when I was testing for it with my regular Genshin Impact test. iPhones, especially the Pro models, have typically been really good for thermal dissipation amongst all phones, but from all the testing I've done on these, they're all very fast, and the regular iPhone 16s get a big fat GPU boost over the previous generation. It's a really nice upgrade for the regular 16s this year. They're using larger batteries this time. And from my light testing, like light load testing, it is crazy how long the iPhone 16 Pro Max lasts. It's kind of strange. I really think it's just to be able to support the energy use of Apple Intelligence, especially for stuff like on-device image generation. So the wired and wireless charging speeds are quite fast this year. If you have the right chargers to pull it off, you can get some higher wattage into these devices. Okay, let's talk about that camera control button thing. Let's start off with this blue one. Okay, wrong side again. Camera control. So this is a capacitive, pressure sensitive button type thing. Now, one of the main purposes of this button is to launch a upcoming feature called visual intelligence. It's a part of Apple Intelligence, and it's designed to be able to, you press this button and it'll give you basically Google Lens functionality. You can point the camera at something and it'll give you information as well as some kind of AI assisted feedback as to what the thing is that you're looking at. Now, because it's not available yet, there's no point even talking about it. But the other thing that this button is supposed to be able to do is camera control. And that's kind of like the main name that they're giving it right now, camera control. So at the basic level, you press it and it opens the camera app. And you press it again, you take a picture, or if you press and hold it, it starts rolling video. Now, the basic functionality is awesome. I think that, with one hand, you can pick up your phone, take pictures, take videos without repositioning your hand. One-handed, it's awesome. But there's way more to it. So Apple has built an entire UI around that button inside the camera app. And you navigate around this interface using this camera control button thing. Now, my initial impression when I used it at their demo was that it was a little confusing to use. And I thought the interface, even though simple, was difficult to navigate with all these different inputs like sliding and tapping with varying pressure. But after using it for a week, I would say that the interaction itself is very intuitive. It's just that the interface and the idea of controlling your camera like this, I'm not sure if it's something most people would actually want to use. Like when you navigate around, you still have to use two hands. This is not a one-handed operation. Launching it and just taking the picture, yeah, you can do that with one hand on that button. But if you want to actually navigate around and slide around with your finger, you definitely need two hands. And I don't know if it's any faster or more convenient than just using the on-screen buttons. It does also work in the vertical orientation, but I just found this to be an uncomfortable grip. I don't think people typically hold their phone this far down the sides, so it's like this weird claw grip. You kind of have to go two hands again in vertical mode. Now, there are some features that I do think that using the sliding mechanism is better. So there's two that come to mind. The first is like zoom, because when you use pinch to zoom, it can kind of be fairly inaccurate to kind of like nail it just right. But with that slide mechanism, you can kind of, you slide around and you get a good feel of how much you need to move your finger. The other menu that I think works well with camera control is their new photographic styles menu. So this is kind of like algorithmic processing of your shots that you take. It's non-destructive and you can play with it, but the reason why it works so well with the camera control interface is because there's so many to choose from. There's 5 skin undertones, and then there's like 9 photo tones, and you get 14 to flip through. And if you're just using the on-screen controls, there's like a lot of flicking and swiping. But with this, it's just you're sliding around, and it's like a carousel of just choosing the style that you want. And you can fine-tune each one to your preferences, but I don't know how often I would personally use a feature like that. I played with it, and I just could not imagine a scenario when I was just regularly using this thing to be able to take pictures a certain way. But I'm really lazy with my photos. I'm just like very much point and shoot. So I would say that for the average person, if the way that you've used your camera for most of your life is just point and shoot, I don't think the camera control interface, like this whole thing, is all that useful. It really feels like it's geared for people that like to manually tweak their shots, and then it makes you think, how many people really do that? And then if it's not a lot of people, why is it on all of the devices? Like even the non-pro versions of these phones, like the regular iPhone 16s, they have this camera control as well. My gut feeling is that this button thing will be used mostly for just launching the camera app, taking photos and videos, and Apple's visual intelligence when it comes around. Okay, the camera system. So the iPhone 16s have what they're now calling a 48 megapixel fusion camera. Now, it seems to be the same hardware as the iPhone 15. The images do look better on the 16 if you look closely, especially when you use that 2x telephoto, but it's subtle differences. You really need to look for them. The ultra-wide cameras have also been updated on the 16s as well. These now have a new 12 megapixel sensor that can shoot macro photos as well. It is noticeably better in low light photos compared to the 15 from last year, but it's still not as good as the competition. I think like Samsung and Google have really good low light ultra-wide cameras in their normal tier phones. The Pro phones also have an updated 48 megapixel ultra-wide. This is a noticeable step up from the previous generation. Like the low light in particular looks quite a bit cleaner. The main shooter has also been labeled as a new 48 megapixel fusion camera. It's supposed to be a faster sensor, but from the shots I was taking, I couldn't really tell much of a difference between the new 16 Pro Max and the 15 Pro Max from previous generation. That new sensor though does allow for 4K 120 shot from that sensor. The mics on all the new iPhone 16s have a neat feature where when you use the phone for video recordings, you can then go into the camera app in post and you can adjust and clean up the audio from the capture. Check this out. So I have some pretty loud environmental noise going on. It's coming from a YouTube video. That's off, that's on. But I'm talking at a pretty normal talking volume. I'm not talking super loud or anything, but you'll see how good this app is at removing that sound. We've seen third-party apps and tools like this before, but to see it built into the phone and have like the mics send the spatial data to be able to calculate it better, it's just neat. I think they've done a really good job of just taking advantage of the different mics on these devices. Okay, real quickly, let's talk about AI. So all 4 phones this year have 8 gigs of RAM, and they also have the same kind of Apple Intelligence capabilities. Well, they will when Apple Intelligence fully launches on these devices. But all of the currently available Apple Intelligence features are in beta still, and they're the same few features that we've been testing on the iPhone 15 Pro devices. So it's like asking Siri to summarize something, or to ask it some like loosely contextual questions, or having it to clean up the photos. They're neat, but the more interesting and arguably more useful features, like having some kind of context-aware Siri, or like the ChatGPT integration, or having the image generation, those things are months away, some of them coming out next year. And it's weird to me how so many Apple Intelligence features are really far away in terms of a timeline. And it's also really weird to me how Apple marketed this whole thing. Like, this is a phone that's available today. It's available to be purchased 2 days from now. And it was supposed to be designed and built from the ground up for Apple Intelligence, yet we can't test the vast majority of Apple Intelligence on these things. Like, it could be amazing in the very distant future, but like, I'm not saying they should rush it. I'm not sure they should release it now, but I'm just saying they shouldn't have marketed these phones as these AI or Apple Intelligence phones when it's missing so much of the equation right now. If I'm being honest, I think the Pro phones will have a tough time selling this year. There just isn't enough of a kind of feature differentiator to pull people to it, I don't think. The regular 16s, they seem pretty good, but yeah, that's my take on the new iPhone 16s.